All right, then let's start. Welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today in this workshop about successful clinical trial strategies for consumer brands. My name is Susanne Mitschke. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Citruslabs. Citruslabs is a digital CRO, a contract research organization, and our focus is specifically on consumer brands. And we help brands to achieve research-backed product claims in an affordable way. And my expertise lies specifically in trial design. And before Citruslabs, I co-founded MindMade, an app to help baby boomers reduce the risk of developing cognitive decline, such as Alzheimer's and dementia. And I was a consultant at PwC, and this accent is German. Now, with Citruslabs, we have supported since 2015 over 260 clinical trials, and we worked with skincare brands, supplement brands, pet wellness products, biotechs, CBD products, devices, and other things as well. And we are really good with participant recruitment. And what really sets us apart is two things. First, we use technology to automate parts of the process so that we can actually be more cost efficient and faster. And B, we really put our study participants first. And recruitment usually makes or breaks clinical studies. And having a partner that is good at recruitment and good at retaining participants in the trial is really what you want and need to make your study a success. Now, for this workshop, my goal is to help you understand what clinical trials are and what the difference is between clinical trials and consumer perception studies, then show you how to design and manage a clinical trial, explore different budgets of clinical trials, and also explain how you can create claims based on the data that you collected during your research. And also, if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box at your Zoom control panel. And we will have time for questions at the end. And I will hope to bring up all of the questions at the end of the presentation. Now, let's talk about clinical trials. Clinical trials really got a boost over the last years, as you can see in this graph. They are everywhere, and these are just the clinical trials registered on clinicaltrials.gov, which means that consumer perception studies are actually not reflected in this graphic. Now, what exactly is a clinical trial? Clinical trials promote, in the best case, that your products are safe to use. They help you to show that your product is effective, that actually work, and show that the product makes a difference for the people who use them, and also help you to support your claims. And of course, there is already a lot of research about ingredients. However, many consumers know the difference between there is some science about the ingredients, and we actually tested our product, and here are the results. Now, let's look closer at the difference between clinical trials versus consumer perception studies. We get this question a lot, what's the difference between these two? And, why do I need a company like Citruslabs to actually run this clinical trial? Can I just do it in-house? If you have a large team and have one person on your team who knows about research, knows how to conduct these studies, you can probably do a consumer perception study on your own. But to actually get a clinical trial off the ground, you'd still need a third party like Citruslabs to conduct the study because of ethical reasons, so that you can't scoop the data and basically can't influence participants to give you better scores, for example, if you're using surveys. Now, another thing I often see is that brands underestimate how many resources it actually takes to properly conduct a clinical trial or even a perception study. And then when they start, they say, oh, I don't have time for this. Can you please take over? This is just some anecdotes, right, to start with. And what are the actual differences? First, clinical trials. They are conducted by a qualified professional, brands can either hire somebody in-house to conduct the trials, or they hire a CRO like Citruslabs. The approach is more scientific, with a clear methodology on how the study is designed, how the study is conducted, how participants are recruited, how data is collected. There will be a protocol. Participants have to sign a consent form, and the study was approved by an IRB, a review board, to make sure that the study is ethical. And the study can also be published on clinicaltrials.gov. Additionally, clinical trials can include biomarkers from blood draws, digital biomarkers from smart devices. Also, the study design is usually a little bit more robust. However, clinical studies can also be conducted through participant-reported outcome measures, PRO, which is similar to a customer perception study, but still different. And the biggest differentiator really is that the questionnaires, they're usually a mix of study-specific and validated questionnaires. Now, consumer perception studies, on the other hand, they are a marketing tool. They are not scientific and can be conducted by anyone. Most of the time, it's a marketing professional. There can be a protocol, but it's not a must. Consumer perception studies are not published on clinicaltrials.gov. They don't go through an IRB, the ethics board. And perception studies also don't usually work with biomarkers. It's basically a set of surveys. People basically have to say if they agree or disagree with a certain statement. All of this just makes them less scientific, less robust compared to a clinical trial, but they are a great marketing tool. And oftentimes these studies have, before and after pictures to make them more robust. But these pictures can also be part, obviously, of a clinical trial. And one big factor for you to determine which study is right for you is budget. Clinical trials are more expensive than perception studies. So when you're deciding, which study type you want to run, this is obviously a big factor. And in this workshop, I also want to give you a quick overview or guideline how you can design your trial and what you need in order to be successful with it. First, think about what you want to get out of your clinical trial. Which question or questions do you want to get answered? This is called a research question. And a research question should be clearly defined, have a focus, think about your claims as well, right? Is that the skin looks brighter, that participants have more energy, that participants sleep better, for example. And this is a good example of, a good research question. For example, the primary objective of this study is to understand if the product is capable of improving the appearance of early signs of aging, such as fine lines, dark spots, and to determine if it helps to improve the overall skin health by promoting hydrated, brightened skin for study participants. Once you have a research question, you can go directly into designing your study further. First, think about, what you want to measure. Is it effectiveness or is it efficacy? For effectiveness trials, it's about if your product works under normal circumstances, study participants will just incorporate your product into their daily lives without changing anything. When you measure efficacy, on the other hand, you test your product under ideal circumstances. Here, participants are carefully selected, have to agree to follow a specific regimen that you set. And for first trial, we always recommend an efficacy trial because they are cheaper, they need fewer participants, and they are also less likely to produce false negative results and actually produce you positive results because they're testing under ideal conditions. And especially when you're running an effectiveness trial with fewer than 200 people, it really can produce false negative results. And you might think, well, Susanne, hang on, right? That doesn't make sense. I want my product to actually work on a larger scale as well and under normal circumstances. And that is right. But people are different. they will have different reactions to your product, and that is normal. For example, a vitamin B12 supplement will likely have a really good effect on an individual that is plant-based, but likely no effect on an individual that eats meat, for example. Or with a skin cream targeting hyperpigmentation, fine lines, wrinkles, you want to make sure that your study participants actually have these concerns, right? Otherwise, you know, the product can't help with these concerns. And in the end, your goal for the study is to give you claims, research backed, right? So this is why you want to carefully select who you're enrolling in the study. Now, the next thing you should think about is your study group, right? Do you want to have a single group, or do you want to run a randomized control trial? There are also other stuff like crossover trials, or in cosmetics, you can do like a split phase study, for example. But for this webinar, let's just focus on single group versus randomized control. Now, on the randomized control, setting, basically randomized control trials, they are the gold standard. They are at least 2 study arms, which is the group first that is actually getting the product, the intervention, and the second arm is usually a placebo or a control group, a peer control group that's not getting any product at all, right? And then there's the possibility of having just a single group study. As the name indicates, there's only one group, the people that actually take your product, right? The intervention. For both types of these studies, you can pick individuals who meet certain criteria that you define. They're called the inclusion-exclusion criteria. And even though an RCT, randomized control trial, is the gold standard, it's often not necessary. To create claims and to show that your product actually works, a single group study is most of the time sufficient, and it is significantly less expensive. Now, next, think about the claims you are currently making, you want to make, right? And obviously, the clinical trial should support your claim. Now, there are 2 types of claims. First, it's an objective claim, and the other one is a subjective claim. And this is how they differ. Objective claims, they collect data from other sources outside of the perception of the participant. For example, through biomarkers, blood draws, digital biomarkers, blood pressure, heart rate, weight, data from sleep or activity trackers. It can also happen through imaging, expert skin grading, instrumentation, right, to measure things on the skin, for example, Tewel or Coniometer or Visia, for example. Now, subjective claims, on the other hand, they are collecting data through questionnaires. Most consumer perception studies work with study-specific questionnaires. It's basically asking, do you agree that this product helped you with X? Yes or no. And then you can say 90% of consumers agreed that this product helped with this specific concern. But you can also make these subjective claims a little bit more scientific using, Likert scales, using validated questionnaires. And if your goal is to get subjective claims, this actually doesn't mean that your study is inferior, right? It can still be a legit clinical study. In an ideal world, you want to get an objective claim, but these claims, they are more expensive. And from my experience, it's oftentimes just not necessary for consumer products, as consumers oftentimes don't know the difference between the different claims. They are more expensive. Objective claims are more expensive because they often involve nurse visits, doctor visits, lab costs, depending on, what you're doing. You might even have to pay for medical devices, which can also eat up a lot of your budget. You can also combine these 2, subjective and objective measurements. For example, when you have a sleep supplement, right? You can recruit people who are using a sleep tracker like an Oura Ring or an Apple Watch, and you can then make it an inclusion criteria that your participants should have such a sleep tracker to actually save a little bit on cost, and then combine the data from this device with the questionnaires, for example. And, as I said, subjective data, subjective claims, they are usually more cost efficient. And these data points, they can be backed up through other stuff. For example, skincare, oftentimes it's done through clinical photography, to strengthen data points. I do want to say that this is oftentimes not only relevant for skincare, though. We also have conducted a study where we actually had a product that helped against bloating to show, that the bloating reduced after taking the supplement, showing before and after pictures, basically from the abdomen of the participant. Now, to wrap this up, companies in the pre-seed seed stage, bootstrapped companies, without a significant budget, we always recommend subjective data over objective data collection because it can get really expensive. And as I said, most consumers, they don't know the difference. It is very likely that you need it. This doesn't mean that your study's an inferior study, or, that perception studies are bad just because you only use questionnaires, right? It is a legit, method. It is called PRO, participant reported outcome. And this is also regularly used in the FDA space. Now let's talk about the participants. Part of a successful clinical trial strategy is to set inclusion and exclusion criteria for your study. In an efficacy trial, you are testing your product under ideal circumstances, and you can decide demographic criteria, medical criteria, other criteria like behavioral criteria, for example, for your participants. For example, you can decide that you want to enroll males and females between 45 to 65 who run at least 30 miles a week and have regular knee pain after a run to test an anti-inflammatory lotion, for example. Or you can recruit only females with moderate to severe premenstrual cramps who also have mood swings and take a specific birth control, right? This is all possible. You are actually not allowed to know the names of the participants or have anything to do with recruitment because it would be unethical. But you can absolutely decide the criteria, what they should meet. So examples are demographic criteria, right? The age range, gender, location, education, income level, lifestyle, right? Should they be active, eat healthy? Do they need to have children, right? Just a couple of examples. Medical is, obviously first thing is, do they need to have certain health conditions, or are they actually allowed to have certain health conditions, right? Think about medication, right? Think about if the conditions, they should be self-diagnosed, for example, GI issues, IBS versus actual diagnosis of Crohn's disease, for example. All of that stuff, right? Then think about other criteria. Do they have to follow a certain diet? Can they take recreational drugs? Are they allowed to exercise, right? Do they need to have a study partner? The only thing you really want to exclude always is want to get pregnant or breastfeeding women. And apart from that, you can be as creative as you want with these criteria. And then you also have to think about the sample size. To make it easy, the number of clinical trial participants should be large enough to provide a sufficient answer to your research question, but should also be the minimum necessary to achieve the same. From my experience, good sample size for first studies between 30 to 60 participants. Thus, you always want to have a couple of extra participants in case somebody drops out. And when you're conducting a randomized control trial where you have at least 2 arms, then the arms should be equal, 50-50. So you basically have to double the number of participants, which is also one reason why these studies, the randomized control trials, are more expensive. And another cost factor that many brands forget is participant compensation. This is basically the compensation that participants get for their time in case they have to go somewhere, for example, a lab to get their blood drawn, or cover transportation costs. For virtual trials, you're looking at 25 to 50, maybe 100 per participant in the form of an Amazon or Walmart voucher. And if participants actually have to do blood draws or anything else, then the compensation goes up depending on what they need to do. Now let's talk about the time frame. You need study design, you need to create your protocol, you need study materials such as consent forms, questionnaires, you need to prepare material for the IRB approval, the ethics board, you need to get approved by them. Then you need to recruit, you need to conduct your trial, and then also leave time for some data analysis. For the first block, the study startup, which is design and creation of everything, usually takes like 4, 6, 8 weeks. For the IRB approval, it's usually 1 to 2 weeks. And depending on participant recruitment, depending on the inclusion exclusion criteria and the number of participants, it will take 2 to 4 weeks. We recruit regularly, 30 participants that are healthy in like 1.5 weeks. So the duration of the clinical trial period, I want to say, is what makes things a little bit tricky and sometimes, prolongs the clinical trial. So you want to think about, when does your product actually reach peak efficacy? It's 4 weeks, it's 8 weeks, 12 weeks, might be even longer. And usually what I see, the longer the trial, the more effects you might see. On average, for consumer products, we see studies that run for like 8 to 12 weeks. And then you want to have 2 weeks for data analysis. So I unfortunately can't give you an average how long it will take. But for a 4-week intervention period, it may take 3 months from start to finish, right? For an intervention period that is 8 to 12 weeks, it may be 4 to 6 months, depending on several factors. It can also be longer. All right. Now let's talk also about the different ways how to conduct a clinical trial. It can be done entirely virtual or with the help of sites or even in a hybrid model. So traditionally, clinical trials involve a research site where participants go to receive their care, get their blood drawn, their skin graded, see a doctor that's confirming a specific result. This is basically how pharmaceutical trials work. These trials, though, they are very expensive. For each research site you're working with, you have to calculate about 35,000. Plus, you have to manage them. You have to find participants for them. So, this 35K is really usually just for the research site. And this is why we facilitate virtual trials and hybrid models. In virtual trials, as the name suggests, everything happens virtually, usually via our platform. And in a hybrid model, the majority of the trial is virtual, but participants have to visit, for example, a lab, to get their blood drawn or their skin graded or whatever you need for the study. And then you have certain check-ins, study check-ins as well. For most consumer products, a virtual trial is sufficient. Due to COVID, actually many pharmaceutical trials, they are also now opting for virtual trials over the more traditional method that is involving research sites. And if you're concerned, for example, about biomarkers, there are actually ways you can actually get objective data from participants through, for example, at-home finger prick tests or from blood pressure monitors, from fitness and sleep trackers. And what I found is that many people think when they do virtual study without any on-site visits and, no blood tests, no skin grading, whatever else they think is necessary, right? This is not a clinical trial. And this is actually wrong. And, I mentioned already, because of the pandemic, many products that need FDA approval were also researched in this way with fantastic results. However, it is obviously possible to also let the skin of the participants be graded. It's possible to draw blood from participants, let that be analyzed as well. These methods, when you do lab work, when you include instruments, right, they are more expensive. And, we can facilitate that, right? We have worked with a ton of sites who are equipped to do any testing you want. The sites, they focus on very specific areas, specific therapeutic areas. So depending what you're looking for, right, we can help with that as well and select a site for you. Personally, I don't think it's most of the times necessary, as most consumers, they don't know the difference. You remember objective versus subjective claims. And especially if this is your first trial and you have a tight budget, probably won't be necessary. One thing that also shouldn't be forgotten is that each clinical trial needs a principal investigator, API, and when you are having a scientific medical advisor or yourself, in the science field, medical professional, this can be you. If you don't have such a person on your team, you need to conduct your study. The role of the PI is basically to oversee the clinical trial and protect the welfare of the participants. At Citruslabs, we do have team members who can take over the role of the PI. If a product is out of our scope, though, we are working with external PIs as well, that we can recruit for you on a contract basis, if you don't have that person on your team. And that is it. This is what you need in order to successfully conduct a trial. Let's recap. First, the research question. Second, what are you measuring? Effectiveness or efficacy? Third, decide on which claims you want to make. Is it objective or subjective? Then think about your study design. Is it single group, randomized control, or even another design? Decide on your participants, inclusions, exclusions, how many. Decide on a time frame. Also decide on a package for your participants, how much you actually want to offer them. Decide if you want a virtual study, a hybrid study, or a site-based study. Pick a PI, a principal investigator, create your study protocol, create all study material, enroll your participants, and that's it. Then you can start your trial. This seems like a lot, right? And we can help you with all of these steps, and you can outsource a clinical trial entirely to us. Now let's talk about the budget. Some of our clients came to us with offers from other more traditional CROs that wanted to charge them 200,000 plus for a simple single group study. This is too much. The biggest chunk you have to spend is on participant recruitment. So you can actually control the cost of your trial through how many participants you want to enroll. And when you work with us, we identify also the best participants, we screen them, based on the inclusion exclusion criteria, we enroll them, we make sure that everybody's onboarded and, basically completes the study and adheres to the protocol. Additional costs are trial planning, the design, protocol, study material creation, the study management, and then also the data analysis. And now you're probably thinking, come on, tell us the price. Unfortunately, pricing is different from study to study, depending on your criteria, your study design. However, on average, for a single group study with 38 participants with a goal to collect data from 30, you will pay around 20,000. And there you have it. They don't have to be expensive. You can achieve results like this, right, without breaking the bank in a short period of time. And this actually brings me to the end of this workshop. Thank you very much for spending some time with me, and we can now open the round for questions. So if you have any questions, put them in the box. And we already have a first question or a statement. Just because consumers don't know the difference doesn't mean that a questionnaire is actually a clinical trial. Dermatologists don't accept subjective trials. That is correct, right? Consumers, I'm not saying that consumers are stupid, but the goal is that you're creating claims, right? And it depends what you're looking for, right? You can do a consumer perception study with study-specific questionnaires, and this is not a clinical trial, but this doesn't mean that, a study with validated questionnaires is actually not a clinical trial. Okay, and then we have another question. If you say dermatologist approved or tested, doesn't it have to be an objective trial? So the thing with that statement, dermatologist approved or tested, doesn't need to be an actual clinical trial. Dermatologist approved basically is a claim that you can make when you have, for example, a product like a face cream, right, a lotion. You can give it to a dermatologist, and then the dermatologist says, yeah, I like this product. I give my thumbs up, I approve it, right? And then you can basically say dermatologist approved. Dermatologist tested usually means that you go to a dermatologist office, right? And then they test it, right? On some subjects they can do, depending, what claims you want to make, right? You do, Visia, you do corneometer, you do a dual test, right? And then they can see before and after, for example, before your baseline, when you did that, before you actually started with the product, and then after, 4-week check-in, 6-week check-in, 12-week check-in, and then basically you can say this is dermatologist tested as well. But that doesn't mean that there is actually clinical trial involved. This just basically means that the dermatologist tested it. Do you have any other questions? Any other questions? No? All right, then this concludes the workshop. Thank you very much, everybody who joined us today. Oh, we have one more question. For a 4-week trial, the price starts at 20,000. So the 4-week is just, something as a placeholder, right? The 20,000 is more a thing for how many participants, right? A simple single study clinical trial with 38 participants starts at 20,000. How long does the average trial last? That is, it depends on the product. It can be, the study period can be 4 weeks, it can be 8 weeks, it can be 12 weeks, depending when your product actually arrives. Peak efficacy for skincare. For skincare, it again depends. I'm so sorry to say that. I would need to know your product a little bit better, right? We had skincare studies that last for 4 weeks to, for example, an eye cream. Eye cream's really easy to do 4 weeks, right? If you're testing retinol product, we usually should opt for 12 weeks, if not even a little bit longer, to see really a difference in the before and afters, and also in the instrumentation, this expert skin grading. If you are testing a moisturizer, for example, or a vitamin C serum, it's usually between 4 to 8 weeks for skincare. And another question: what would you say is the biggest reason a trial doesn't achieve the results it wants? That's actually a really tricky question. I think it comes down first to study design, right? Some studies, they are designed to fail because they are way too complex and way too complicated, specifically if there is also a time constraint in it. For example, right, there are studies where, you need to recruit 300 people. These 300 people need to undergo blood draws, some other stuff they need to do, and you only have, for example, 3 to 4 months to actually recruit everybody. This can be a challenge, especially if the participant compensation is low. And then also, having the right inclusion exclusion criteria is really important, because otherwise trials will just fail. All right. Let's see if there's any other question. All right, last chance. Okay. Then, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you gained some insights and, that, it can help you in the future. And I will follow up with a recording of this webinar and some more information. And, thank you very much again and hope to see you soon. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.